We're from a company called Maleva Security Labs. We work at the intersection of AI and security. So specifically, when we say AI security, we mean the security of AI systems. There's often a bit of confusion around that. People assume we mean AI for cybersecurity. It's obviously a very important intersection, and there is some grey area there. But we want to talk to you today about some of the trends we're seeing, a bit about adversarial machine learning and AI security. If you are sort of new to the field, or if you're looking to understand where the current trends that we're seeing are. But let me introduce ourselves first. So we'll talk about adversarial machine learning. So these are all the ways that we can disrupt AI systems, which is the fun sort of hacky part of the field. But then we're also going to talk about AI risk. So what does that mean from the perspective of how can we make sure that our institutions, the businesses we work with, are safe from those kinds of security incidents. So by means of understanding where you are, I'm interested to know if anyone here is familiar with the term adversarial machine learning already. Can I get a show of hands? Fantastic. So you put your hand up first. In what capacity are you familiar with it?
So as I'm a lecturer of cybersecurity, I'm working on both security of AI and AI for security, both the notions. So I'm an active researcher, and that's how I know different things related to adversarial machine learning.
Fantastic, fantastic. You also put your hand up over here.
Yeah, I don't know very much. I've just heard totally of buzzwords like, I can't remember the terms even. One is a challenge, one is a responder, or is it an initiator or something like that? I've just heard of something. Is it the same as generative adversarial networks, or is that something?
Similar. Sometimes it's talked about in the same context from a methodology perspective, like how the tools work. But there are some differences there. But it's really cool to know that you've heard the term before. There are some other hands in the room.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In my previous postdoc, I was researching on encrypted computation. So so confidentiality attacks was our major concern. So we try to put up some encrypted algorithms. So basically encrypted machine learning based on encrypted data. So the adversarial entities cannot target our algorithm. So I'm a bit familiar with the topic.
Fantastic. I love that you use the term buzzword down here, because a lot of the time we do hear adversarial machine learning without really a good explanation of what it means in the real world. So adversarial machine learning is mostly an academical research field that refers to all the ways that you can hack machine learning models. So you can disrupt them and make them do things they're not meant to do, or make them just not work. You can deceive them, so you could sort of have premeditated outcomes in mind and then force them to do those things. Or you can disclose information from them about the internal model weights or about the training data. And for a long time this was considered a really theoretical, academic, unrealistic kind of threat. When the first papers were proposed, 12 to 15 years ago with these techniques, no one ever thought we'd actually see these kinds of incidents in the wild. And over the last few years, for those of us who are working in AI security, it's been a real we told you so moment, which is great for us, but very unfortunate from the sense that we are actually seeing AI security incidents in the wild. So now it's more about, we have this theory of adversarial machine learning. How do we actually protect the real businesses from those threats? And what are those realistic threats? And that's sort of what we're going to talk about today. Let's introduce ourselves. My name is Harriet Farlow. I'm the founder of Maleva Security Labs. So like Angel mentioned, I've been working at the intersection for about 10 years. I was a data scientist for a long time in mostly defence organisations in Australia, but also some other large public sector projects like the Department for New South Wales and banks. And then I worked at a startup in the United States. And then I moved to the Australian Signals Directorate, which is our GCHQ equivalent. And I was a data scientist on cybersecurity teams. And when I was at ASD, I started my PhD in adversarial machine learning. Originally, the field that I chose was very different. My PhD topic was translating technical signals intelligence to military customers. But in the literature review process, I came across this field of adversarial machine learning. And I just thought it was wild that in all the time that I'd been a data scientist, people were talking about safety and ethics and bias, but no one had ever had a conversation around me about the security of machine learning models. And even back when I started my PhD in 2020 and doing it sort of alongside my role at ASD, I was able to witness that transition from academia to practice. And a lot of the stuff I was seeing at ASD was that, the national security community at least was taking it really seriously. And so I left and started Maleva Security Labs, hoping that I could help private companies and small medium enterprises specifically take AI security as seriously. So we've been working on it for a couple of years now. We do training to organizations and workshops. We do research, some of which we'll be talking a bit about today. And then we do things like threat intelligence, which Miranda leads. So Miranda, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, awesome. This is a bit of an outdated slide, and as we've restructured Maleva and what we're targeting in the field, my role's changed as well. So I'm actually threat intelligence lead at Maleva. My background, I started off at the Australian Signals Directorate, so yeah, GCHQ equivalent, but more specifically the NCSC equivalent, so the Australian Cyber Security Centre. I was part of a team that has a UK equivalent more recently based off of the work that we've been doing, and we helped them set it up, which was cool, called the Cyber Hygiene Improvement Programs team, so CHIPS is the acronym. And the role of this team was to effectively enumerate all of government and critical infrastructure in Australia's internet-facing attack surface, provide them quarterly reports on attempting to reduce that attack surface through improving their cyber hygiene in an effort to do a general uplift of the security posture amongst government agencies. And that broader team, the broader section that team sat in, made a lot of the key policies that guide the protective security frameworks in Australia, which organisations have to use based on the information sensitivity that their departments and their businesses are working with. So from there I moved into private industry, and I now manage a offensive cybersecurity team that does penetration testing and red teaming for government, defence and intelligence, and also the private sector, including some governance risk and compliance work like IRAP assessments, which you probably haven't heard of here, but it's an ASD registered program of assessors that can perform independent assessments of infrastructure for any entity and report it back to ASD. And yeah, now with Harriet, I'm working on bringing what I've learned from the cyber field over to AI, where it applies, which is a bit half-half. It's something we'll talk about today. Mm-hmm. And yeah, building on our threat intelligence capabilities.
It's so valuable having you with your cyber background as well. There's definitely the bridging of the AI field and the security field, and in practice there's still quite that separation there. And we've definitely learned that there's a lot of ways that we can bring cybersecurity methodology into AI, but it needs to be adapted. So I also love that we're actually wearing the same outfits on the slide, which is really on brand.
Yeah. I thought about that when I was walking out the door. I was like, damn. It's on theme. Well, I've already talked a little bit about what we do, but we're about to set up a UK company actually. So if anyone is interested in collaboration or interested in learning more about the research that we're doing, we really want this to be a discussion and the start of an open forum. So please come to us after with questions or feedback. Reach out to us. We'll try and save some time at the end of this for questions and discussion too. But yeah, in Australia, the landscape is different to what it is over here, to what it is in other countries like the United States. So it's really great to be able to understand from all of you as well what your take on AI security and your pulse on the kinds of priorities over here. So I'm really grateful that you're all here. It's really cool. So this is what we're going to be talking about today. I know there's a few of you who already know a bit about adversarial machine learning, but we'll just do a bit of a 101 to at least get everyone on the same page, so that we can then talk about some of the risk analysis research that we've done,
We've been doing a project over the last 8 or so months that was trying to understand what kinds of AI security incidents are happening in the real world. All of that research is open sourced, so we really want feedback on that as well. We're going to talk through some case studies as part of that as well. And then we'll go through some so what's and some time for discussion as well. Cool. So I've already talked a little bit about the context to AI security and the transition from the academic field of adversarial machine learning, where, about 10 to 15 years ago, these researchers released this paper that showed the first adversarial machine learning attack. And they added these adversarial pixels to an image of a panda so that when a machine learning model looked at it, it was classified as a given, even though it looked identical to humans. And the idea of hacking models or algorithms has existed as long as any kind of IT system has, like spam filters, for example, in the early 2000s. There are always people trying to hack those. But the rise of AI means that the way that those models are built creates really new vectors for attack. And so that's why we talk about the term AI security as the sort of practical implementation of that knowledge versus the sort of academic field of adversarial machine learning. But I think a really important question to sort of bring it back is when we talk about AI, what is that? Because, I'm sorry, I have a really bad joke here, but when I first told my mum that I work in, it's really bad. When I first told my mum I work in AI, she said, "Oh, darling, what are you doing working in artificial insemination?" That laugh is really undeserved. But she works in medicine, so that's what AI is to her. And even though we all know we're talking about artificial intelligence, everyone here, I guarantee, and everyone you talk to has a slightly different interpretation of what artificial intelligence actually is.
We actually met someone this week who was an artificial inseminator at our AI security conference. So they've been an expert in all forms of AI for many years.
Yeah, before they worked in artificial intelligence security, they worked in artificial insemination of cows. So they can say they've worked in AI for the last, 5-10 years, right? Most of the time, I talk at conferences a lot. Usually when I talk to AI with people, the first thing they think of in their mind is clearly something like this. It's the Terminator, it's Skynet, it's AI going rogue. And there are obviously some, reasonable concerns around this. But the thing that makes this kind of perception really challenging is that people understand AI to be this all-knowing ephemeral black box. Like, people anthropomorphize AI. And so when you think about hacking AI, it's sort of like convincing a human or, conducting psychological tactics, which isn't really the right way to think about it because an AI system is just code. And so talking about it as though you're influencing it sort of misses the security landscape and doesn't really frame it the same way that you would frame a traditional IT or cybersecurity system.
There's a point we'll get to later, but that perception often only targets one point of the life cycle, right? The deployment and inference stage, where people think that, if you're talking to a chatbot, it does appear like you're socially engineering it, but that is one attack surface, and it's the last attack surface that's present in its entire life cycle.
Yeah. The term attack surface is a really good one because in cybersecurity, we talk about all of the your combination of systems and all of the potential entry points and vulnerabilities as that attack surface. And so if we think about a machine learning model, we also want to think about that as an attack surface because that helps us come at it from a security mindset. So if we think about a machine learning model, this is basically what it is. It's a bunch of inputs. It goes through some mathematical equations and combinations that are quite complicated. And then at the end, there is an output or prediction. So if we take our Terminator example, if the Department of Defense, which was which is who created Terminator in the films, if they're trying to train their AI system to, for example, recognize Sarah Connor, so that the Terminator can kill her before she has a son, etc., etc. If you've seen the plot, I hope that makes sense. But they would provide their AI system a bunch of labeled images, some of whom would be Sarah Connor, some of whom would not. this machine learning model would then process all of those images in thousands and thousands of iterations and update its understanding of what a Sarah Connor image is versus not a Sarah Connor image is. And then when you give it a new image, it's able to correctly classify with some sort of confidence interval whether that's Sarah Connor or not. And so thinking about it as an actual, that's a better way of putting it. So you have all of your input images, you have this understanding mathematically of what those images represent, and then you end up with a confidence interval at the end. Thinking about a machine learning or an AI system that way is a much more useful way to think about it if you're thinking about the security of it. And that life cycle changes depending on what you want to do. So if you're training a model to recognize Sarah Connor, when you see her, that's a computer vision task. It's helping the AI understand and process imagery and vision. But if you wanted to train a large language model, that would be a very different kind of model architecture, which changes the attack surface. And there are, naturally some similarities when it comes to different kinds of models. They're all probabilistic, they all rely a lot on the training data, they all go through this training process. But the way that those different components are plugged together changes the way that those systems are vulnerable and the kinds of methods that you need to consider as well.
So when we're working with organisations, a lot of the challenge we face is in convincing them why AI systems and IT systems have to be considered individually based on the vulnerability management that's required for them, but then convincing them that it's worth spending on AI in remediation of the whole, the systems as a whole, right? Because inevitably AI systems are sitting within IT systems, and as part of that they inherit majority of the vulnerabilities that are part of the existing IT system that they're within. And then it gets more complicated the more nested you get with things like computer use AI and agentic chaining that then potentially have the power to spin up their own containers, VMs, and you get a system within a system within a system, each with a different attack surface. So the way that we explain it to them first is by breaking down IT versus AI systems. And so when we're looking at IT systems, as most of us probably know, they're deterministic, right? They're logic-based, and what you code in is what you get out. You're pretty aware of the capability of that system. And so, and you can do a lot of debugging with that, right? You can understand the workflow of an entire function by stepping through it bit by bit. And what does that mean for vulnerability management? Well, when there is an error, you can reverse engineer it to the point of failure, and you can apply a direct one-to-one patch through changing the code, changing access configurations, role-based access controls, whatever it is, and you know that that's been mitigated. And it might have some other downstream effect, but that particular patch has been done for that system. But for AI systems, they obviously don't work like that because they're probabilistic and they inherently have an error margin that needs to be handled. And when you're working with this sense of statistical likelihoods that's so powerful, and what people love about AI, its ability to infer and generalize and adapt, it does really make vulnerability management difficult because you're working with attempting to optimize these architectures and align the models as much as possible. And you're adding in external and internal layers of defenses, like defense in depth, and as well performing evaluations to try and understand how those mitigations have reduced the error margin so that you can have some level of expectation around with what intervals it will fail and give you false outputs. So as you can imagine, that is an entirely different set of considerations where at the end of the day, even after you do that error margin will still exist, and risk managers have to go at some point, we accept that level of risk. Comparatively in IT, when they're doing risk tolerance, it's often because an organisation has failed to, or for organisation-specific reasons, can't apply specific remediations in that context. Might be a budgeting limitation or something to do with legacy software that they're running already that makes it difficult for them to implement certain things. So that's quite different in the sense that one is you could never have perfected it, or you can account for these errors as much as possible by doing, taking the averages and means across a set of evaluations that some of which will not be completely true. Versus security systems where probably not actually in practice, but theoretically you could secure the entire attack surface, not that you ever see in an application. And then when we're also talking about the attack surface of the inputs, if you want to focus on that stage, For IT systems, again, they're taking parameterized queries that are expected. So this could be, numbers, language. It could also be database queries, other forms of content. But it is programmed in, and it will error in a determined way. And the problem with errors here is usually something to do with, again, how it's been constructed. So data leakage through an API error, something like this. Whereas for AI systems, they're becoming so increasingly multimodal that attack surface is ridiculously hard to deal with. You have natural language, you have maths, you have audio, visual, even things like IoT, device sensors, huge amounts of signals data, things that you can't observe the model's entire feature extraction and the decoding of this information, and then it's recoding, right? So to try and secure that process is especially difficult. And like we said earlier, the point at which we bridge this is that AI systems are sitting within IT systems, and soon vice versa. And yeah, unfortunately, that means that the remediation has to occur in tandem with both of those kinds of systems. So while the cybersecurity practices still apply, the emphasis we place is that, yeah, you also need more than that. So when we're thinking about the attack surface for ML models, we take people through the entire life cycle, which a lot of the time they're not super used to. So, but I'm sure you will. We start with, well, maybe we don't have it exactly on there, but data collection and pre-processing are the first few stages, right? And when you're thinking about the problems that you can get in data collection, you're thinking of things to do with the open sourceness that is likely where these large companies are scraping a lot of their data from, right? So this is a primary injection point for people to perform data poisoning. And the unfortunate bit is you don't need to cause large disruption to the samples or the training data to have a really significant effect. And something like data poisoning affects its entire life cycle downstream, and it can be in ways that are really imperceptible for its entire life cycle, causing things like bias and, yeah, something when we're working in a national security context might be something like influence and causing disinformation throughout the generations of outputs that are happening in the model. When we're thinking about the pre-processing stage, we're thinking about how the data is being cleaned, and if it's labelled data, how it's being labelled before, which will determine the way that the model performs the feature extraction and ultimately how it forms its understanding of what it's classifying. And so in this case, attackers might be seeking to, we haven't seen this in practice yet, but it's more of a theoretical one, alter the labels that are being attributed to the data such that the AI comes to wrong conclusions once it's deployed. But again, that would be really good for someone like a state actor to target. During the model training stage, we get that idea of, again, learning encryption associations, and things like backdoor injection, where rather than introducing a bias into the model, you're introducing a sort of jailbreak. So if you're in cyber, that's a familiar term for, yeah, backdooring the model in a way that when you prompt it a specific way, it will act how you have predetermined its action to be under that very specific circumstance. And again, this is hard to detect because backdoors, they don't occur until the trigger is pulled. So the model can act exactly how it's intended to this whole time, and then with one specific input, we'll have this extra feature that you've added in. And when you think about the model training aspect as well, you have new ways that people are thinking of contributing to training, like in federated learning scenarios, right, where you have this decentralization of the model training process, and different nodes of people are able to contribute to the model. But if you have a singular node contributing malicious training data, or contributing to the way it's processed as it's learning, then it affects the global model, not just that node. So there's a lot of supply chain risk inherently in the AI space. And then finally, when we're moving into inference and deployment stage, like we said, this is the one everyone focuses on because it's easy to understand and it's what the end user sees. And so that's obviously what everyone's familiar with. And at inference time, you have things like evasion attacks for LLMs, prompt injection will be something that you're hearing about a lot, prompt engineering. And yeah, basically any sort of carefully crafted input to disrupt, deceive, or require disclosure from the model and its output. You also can get things like membership inference attacks at this stage, where people are querying a model to try and understand what was in the training data. It's especially a worry if the model performs something called memorization, where it does a one-to-one mapping of training data to an output that it's producing. So that's bad for the leakage of proprietary data. I think what else, like PII and things if it's in a government setting. And also model extraction attacks, where you might be able to query a model so hard and so well that you can start producing your own model and optimizing it until it produces the exact same outputs as the model that you are querying, in which case you've just stolen someone's model, and that's a huge financial loss for XYZ company. Mm-hmm. So if we want to take you through some more tangible tangible cases of what we've been describing, because the attack surface, like we said, it's been theoretically mapped out, right? And all these stages we know exist and we know are vulnerable, but in application it's quite difficult to target a lot of these layers, and you would need to perform a traditional cybersecurity attack, style attack, to get a foothold in the system, to have access to potentially a database in the first place, or the model waits wherever they're hosted to perform this exploit. So what we are seeing is a lot of research, and we have some in the wild cases as well. But for this first case, the Morris 2 worm, this was a research-based attack where they were targeting generative AI systems, but the particular one that they focused on were generative AI-powered email assistants. So they produced a zero-click worm, which just means that there is no user interaction required for it to execute its attack. And what they did was they produced a worm that had two functions, right? The first was that it had a self-replicating adversarial prompt feature, in which it would tell, once the email was received with this self-replicating adversarial prompt, it's a mouthful, it would prompt the AI, the generative AI that was receiving this email, into producing this prompt again in any other email that the email assistant sent out from there. So in the case then that any other person receiving an email was using an AI-powered email assistant, it would do the same. The prompt would go into the memory, it would be used in the reconstruction of new emails, because in retrieval augmented generation, or RAG database structures for AI, what they do is they have this set of external information that they use to create the context for any of their future generations. So once this replicating prompt is stored in there and it gets called again every time, users don't have to do anything before in every email it's sent, and whenever it lands, it's sent again, sent again, sent again. The next thing it had was just basic prompt injection for data leakage, and so whenever the email was received by a target system, it would cause the AI to start leaking information about the user's emails, which could be sensitive, bank statements, it could be credentials, one-time codes, whatever, back to the original email sender. So yeah, those two features this worm made it A, self-perpetuating, and B, causing data leakage. The next one we have is, well, this is a good one. It's a personal favourite. Not because I think it's good, but it's just funny. So this guy, I think, Eric Jacklich is his name, and between 2020 and 2021, he filed 180 fraudulent unemployment claims in the state of California, causing the state $3.4 million. And the way he was able to do that was he was bypassing facial recognition systems that didn't have any other sort of check other than that his face matched the face on the license. So they weren't querying any other sort of state-level database that could validate this person's identity. And so he went online and he stole a bunch of people's identities just based off of things on the dark web that had already been dumped. And he went and applied for new licenses across a bunch of different states using all this stolen social security numbers of people and their names and dates of birth and all the points of identity you need to do X, Y, Z. And in each time he would wear a wig and take a photo at the office that would get put on the license, and then when he goes back home and attempts to create a new account on this identity verification system and they ask for a validation of his ID versus face, he puts the wig back on, he takes a selfie, and the AI is like, that's great, that's you, nice. Moving on. He gets all the money, it gets sent to his bank account, he takes it out of an ATM, and eventually they clock on and they're like, wow, we're losing a lot of money, can someone check why? This guy.
We suddenly have way more people in our database with curly hair.
Yeah, the person's like tapping through and they're like, I swear, this guy looks like that girl I just saw, and he just keeps going through it. So the final case study that we'll talk about happened just weeks ago, and again, you've probably heard of it just because of how much hype the DeepSeek model had when it came out. But this is a cybersecurity specific vulnerability, right? So in the case of DeepSeek, vulnerability researchers at Wiz, they found a ClickHouse database that was hosted online and that was completely unauthenticated. So anyone could run arbitrary SQL queries, which meant they just had unrestricted access to whatever was in the database that was hosted online, and anyone could remote in and do so. So as part of that, they were able to read through user queries and responses from the model, so probably some pretty weird things, whatever people are asking the chatbot about, exposing all the chat interactions. They had system prompts in there and fine-tuning, so that's proprietary data for DeepSeek. As well as some information on back-end operational data, API references and other metadata, but they also had API keys and authentication secrets for other types of infrastructure. So I guess there are a lot of both theoretical and attacks in application that we're seeing, and one of the interesting trends that we have been able to draw from all the threat intelligence work that we do is that academic research is actually a really good indicator of what we're going to be seeing in the wild. So adversaries are taking literature as it's coming out, and they're either operationalizing attacks that the research sort of inferred would work but didn't have a proof of concept for. They would make it their own and use it and figure out how to operationalize it and use it, or they were taking fully functional exploits and performing them in the wild. So as part of our threat intelligence, and something that differs it from traditional CTI or cyber threat intelligence, is we do scrape from academic research and we try and draw conclusions on what we think is, I guess, the easiest or the most detrimental if an adversary was actually able to use what was in those papers. We're also seeing a lot of, potential in the AI supply chain area. This is something that the cybersecurity sector overlooked for a long time until they started getting software level vulnerabilities through imported dependencies. And AI, obviously, a majority of what goes into it is open source. Not many people are making their own models from scratch. They don't need to. There's great resources available for both in terms of data, the actual models themselves, fine-tuning, any libraries that help you, LangChain, PyTorch. If something happened to them in the supply chain, it would be a mess. So we're expecting people to continue to sort of inject malicious dependencies and poison training data sets, and like we said earlier, unfortunately we won't see the downstream effects for those until they choose to use them. So the players sort of expect that they're there and try and mitigate around that. We're definitely expecting cybersecurity vulnerabilities to be a huge continuation, because for as long as the field has been going, people have still been having trivial exploits. OWASP top 10 for web apps has been invaluable to the field, but people are still having SQL injection today, which is trivial at this point. So, another cool thing that our threat intelligence has been letting us stay on top of is emerging attack techniques, and so something cool that we can expect coming, I say cool because I'm a techie, right? And I'm like, that's cool, I can't believe they did that, but the implications are not cool.
We obviously care about the defenses.
So sometimes I read things and I'm like, wow! And then I'm like, oh. Tokenization and manipulation attacks. So this is a type of jailbreak that's emerging, but it also can lead to things like denial of service. And what it's targeting is, so for any sort of character that you're working with, Unicode selector variations, they allow you to display different data through that character, right? And so in this case, you can see that this single character has a token count of 43. So what they've done is they've manipulated the bytes behind this character such that it has inflated the size of the character itself once it's delivered to a language model in this case. And you can either hide jailbreaks in the bytes such that the jailbreak is potentially decoded when the LLM's processing it, and it'll bypass detection techniques because it looks like a character to any existing guardrail, because guardrails at the moment, they don't have a decoding feature or anything that would start doing analysis on the character that's coming in, more so than its natural language processing, its semantics. But it also could lead to sort of attacks where you inflate the token count and you do a denial of service by sort of exploiting the capability of the model to decode and produce those tokens. So disrupting models that way. And if you have sort of a scenario where two agents were talking to each other, you would be able to sort of entirely strip this one of its function if you kept sending huge amounts of tokens to it. What else are we seeing? LLM memory and persistence attacks. So jailbreaks, in bug bounties at the moment, people don't like check OpenAI and things, they don't really care about jailbreaks anymore, or direct jailbreaks at least, because they only affect the end user. And so what people are looking into are memory persistent exploits, where you can impact a user throughout the life cycle, like the entire time that they're using this model through different sessions because of the persistence through the memory function. And if you think about a scenario where the memory is shared across users, then they get persistence that way as well. Yeah, increased model extraction and like data theft, just because there's so many ways to query models available, and there's increasingly the ability to do it in an automated fashion. You can just strip huge amounts of data, as well as automated jailbreaking. So we're expecting more use of agentic AI in performing red teams on behalf of humans, and they're able to scale much more than humans can perform attacks manually. So, you know, recently we've been actually seeing some red teaming tools that use agents to perform the beginning reconnaissance, and they spin up every single node that is, like, you know, they start targeting every node in an nmap scan all at once, which is hugely noisy for a system, but it also means it's probably way more effective in getting its end result within seconds versus a human spending days doing reconnaissance and then trying to figure out which one of the assets is the one they should target. Mm-hmm. Yeah, awesome. Sweet, that's all for me.
Awesome. Let's so it's clear there's a lot of concerning things happening in the AI security space, right? And it's this real blend of the kinds of terms that we're used to working with in cybersecurity that AI people aren't necessarily used to working with, and jargon and terminology that is really important to the productionization and the implementation of security, because that's how cybersecurity professionals talk, right? And so some of the research that we're doing now is, if we're thinking about taking, you know, understanding all of these attacks that are happening in the wild, what do we do from a risk perspective in an organization? And this is challenging, because we come from cyber, come from data science, and we've recently been exploring the entire field of risk management and actuarial studies and how to quantify the impact, because we would find that, especially in Australia, where most of the businesses we're working with, maybe they create their own AI models, but it's based on existing models in Hugging Face or other repositories that they're fine-tuning. You know, it's not like they are creating the kinds of models that are in Microsoft products or something. They're usually end users. And so we'd be going to these organizations and saying, you know, there are AI security incidents that are happening. Some of them affect the third-party systems that you're using, but some of them will impact any AI system you're using, even as an end user, and you still have responsibilities. And they would sort of ask, okay, well, what is my potential loss? How can you quantify this so that I can decide how much money to spend on it? And in a field that's very new, and when there isn't a lot of data, that was really, really hard. So we've been working on understanding all of the incidents that are happening and the potential impacts in a way that we can then talk to businesses about it. And, you know, we recently went to a conference on risk management analysis where we were talking about AI security to the crowd, and one of the risk management professionals asked, all right, but isn't AI an optional risk like smoking or drinking? Which is a really interesting way of thinking about it, and a very risk analysis way of thinking about it, because it's certainly not the way that I think about it upon reflection, because I think that if you're not using, and you know, if you're not using AI, you're at risk, especially today, or at least you're missing out on a lot of opportunities. I'm really optimistic about the rise of AI, but it's more about managing and mitigating the kinds of risks and those attacks that we are seeing. So the kind of work that we've been doing is looking at all of the sort of media reports that we're used to seeing, for example, understanding, is this the kind of incident where an AI is impacting its environment, which we might call a safety incident, or is it the kind of incident where the environment, some sort of external actor, maybe a human or AI, is actually impacting the AI system, which is what we would call an AI security incident. And picking those apart and understanding the differences and how organizations need to respond differently. For example, the kinds of security lexicon and processes we're talking about is more relevant to AI security incidents. We therefore want to understand those specific incidents better and those kinds of trends. So there is an importance in the difference between safety and security because it impacts like what kind of mitigations we put in place, but this isn't necessarily a differentiation that we're seeing in practice, at least in a way that where there's a lot of best practice for companies to understand. So the project started from those two questions. Are AI security incidents happening in the wild? I mean, we've seen from the case studies they are, but what is the magnitude? Like how many incidents are happening and who tends to be targeted the most? And then like what kind of modeling techniques can we use to speak the language of organizations? I've listed the website here. You're welcome to go and check it out. The project is a year long to start. We're sort of at month 8 now. So we released an interim report and data, and we'll pop it up later as well. But anyone who's interested in collaborating or giving us feedback, please do. It's really hard. I didn't realize it would be quite so hard when we started the project. So let me show you the state at the moment. So we've already talked about the differences between the fields when it comes to reporting incidents in like traditional cybersecurity versus AI security, and the differences between a cyber system or an information technology system and an AI system. And that means that the kinds of mitigations we put in place to counter cybersecurity attacks don't necessarily work for AI, or there are additional things we need to consider. And so the state of AI security at the moment is that if an incident is reported, which, I mean, it doesn't need to be reported, first of all. There are at least 4 to 5 main databases. There are 4 specific AI incident databases where they get reported. There's one by MITRE. If you're familiar with cybersecurity, MITRE is an authority on tactics, techniques, and procedures. They have the Atlas database that lists techniques, and procedures for adversarial machine learning, and they also have an incident database where things get reported. There's one called the AI risk database, there's one called the AI incident database, there's lots. And then if there's more of a traditional cyber flavour to it, it might get logged as a CVE and then put in the National Vulnerability Database. So we basically combed through all of these databases to understand which of these were AI security databases. And let me show you, I have to hop down here, what we have. So this is the, actually maybe I'll take you through here. This is the website that I showed earlier, and this is the data that we've released at the moment. So what we have is 91 different AI security incidents. It's really hard listing a number like 91 because these are the incidents that are reported in a database. We obviously hear a lot in the media as well about incidents, and one of the main challenges we found was that if one of these 91 incidents is reported, it's usually reported by internal teams. So if a company is doing internal red teaming or research, they might choose to disclose an issue if they find it, but they also might choose not to. And when we were looking at where all of these incidents were being reported, in one of these, like 4 AI databases, for example, none of those incidents were reported in all of them. So we went through all these incidents, and there are a few main takeaways. First of all, that AI security incidents are actually happening in the wild. So we have those case studies, but they're happening en masse. And the kinds of incidents we're seeing are, for example, this top one, remote code execution on this AI application. These adversarial examples that were evading malware detection. You know, people can put fake data in one of those open source databases and impact the classifiers that are trained on it. We've got lots of examples of just like the California tax evasion. There was one in Shanghai as well, where people evaded the facial recognition authentication to things like malicious files being like saved in Hugging Face model files that can then execute malicious code later on. Lots of incidents. They're only reported from internal testing, which is a real challenge because it means that they can choose not to report them. Those lines aren't really clear. And most of the kinds of attacks we're seeing are like some of those evasion attacks or more traditional cyber attacks, but with an AI flavour. I encourage you to go look through the data because I'm conscious of time. But I think the interesting thing we're finding, and I think the reason that it's really useful talking to all of you as well, is that depending on where in the world we're based, what that looks like is really different. So, coming from Australia, a lot of the conversations we're having are around, like, what is AI? How do we implement it well? How do we write an AI policy? Over here, and the reason that we wanted to, create a UK company as well is because this is where a lot of the thought leadership around AI regulation, for example, is happening. And it's really setting a lot of global standards, the UK and Europe. And so the conversations over here are more like, how can I comply with the EU AI Act? Whereas when we're over in the United States, the conversations around AI security are more around, how can I beat my competitors using AI security? And that's where a lot of the model development is happening. So it would be, it's a really interesting landscape for us to work in. It's changing really rapidly. There are AI security incidents, and there are risks that every organisation needs to be aware of. Companies implementing AI need to consider the right questions they should be asking. For example, a lot of the work we do is going to organisations and helping them write AI policies. We're doing training, and then we hear all of the unfiltered questions and thoughts around AI and their challenges. And we'll often talk to executives and say, who is responsible for AI risk or AI security in your organisation? And they say, oh, it's the AI team. We talk to the AI team, they say, oh no, it's definitely the security team. And the security team is like, what? What AI risks? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's Microsoft Azure, they're responsible for all of those
vendor.
risks. And
Yeah.
Microsoft is like, definitely not,
Yeah.
depending on what kind of incident it is. And the challenge around all these vendors as well that use AI, responsible, Microsoft Azure is a really common enterprise tool that's used. And they would be responsible for some security incidents, but not all of them. And we're finding that a lot of organisations aren't asking the right questions. Like, they don't really understand what questions to ask in the first place, and therefore how that impacts, whatever policy they're writing, or how to equip their teams with the right training to do what they need to do. So I think the main takeaway is that it's really important that everyone is working on these questions. So in your capacities over here, in the research that you do, or the kind of work that you're doing, and contributing to the thought leadership and the best practice around the world is really, really important.
Yeah, I think along with the challenges of keeping up with the regulatory field as they're popping up and trying to figure out which framework applies best in which sector, which region, etc. Another problem that we're sort of pushing with the people that we're working with, this week in the conference to try and solve is that unlike cyber, there's no sort of standardized way to report AI vulnerabilities and or to measure the risk. So in cyber, like we said, there's the CVE database, and CVE attributes a unique identifier to any vulnerability that emerges in software, and from henceforth until the end of time, once that number is attributed, everyone in the space knows what it means, and they can stay up to date on patches, any information around the risk management, etc., which the AI space just doesn't have, and that's one of the reasons why we think we're only finding 91 incidents over many years.
It's definitely underreported.
Yeah. And then secondly, you have CVSS, which is the Common Vulnerability Scoring System in cyber, and it allows people to understand the risk of vulnerabilities in a very standardized way. Everyone's familiar with it. It's used in risk assessment reports. But again, in AI systems, there's not a way to do this. So trying to convince organizations of risk that they can't even quantify and they don't know how to prioritize, that's especially difficult.
Yeah, it's very hard. It's very, very hard. Conscious of time, I'd love to open up to questions or comments if this is an area that you're working on and you have insights from the kind of organisations you're talking with. But if I can do a very quick spruik. Another thing that if you're working with students, they might find useful, we're running an AI security communication competition at the moment. And it's open for a few more weeks, and it's open to anyone in the world. So the challenge we were finding was that there wasn't enough understanding that AI security is a challenge, and a lot of that is in the communication. So we have an open round, we have a student round, and there's a prize of $1,000 for each round Australian, so maybe like £500. Sorry, that's a lot of money for us. But yeah, so you might like to share it with your students, any kind of creative way of communicating an AI security challenge. We also have a podcast called the AI Security Podcast, because no one else was claiming. No one else was claiming the space. It used to be called something else, and we were like, why don't we just call ourselves the AI Security Podcast?
Yeah.
So if you'd like to listen to that and give us feedback, or come on, anything like that, we really are here to collaborate. So thank you very much, and please give us your questions and your comments.